Hello, this is Henry Sullivan here speaking with Kristine Madera. I want to welcome you all to our live session. This is a discussion that we have every 2 weeks. And this time the topic has to do with vice and virtue. So it's going to be an interesting topic. The first thing that I wanted to ask you about, Kristine, though, is uh, the idea of the inner landscape. I'd like to
hmm
kick it off by hearing a little bit about that idea. What is it? What does it mean? How does it work?
All right. So, from my perspective, an inner landscape is kind of the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and things that make up experiences that make up our interior version of reality. So, we have a version of reality that is outside of us, but usually we have kind of our own inner reality that we project onto the world.
Mm,
And you can see this, with where you have two people having the same experience, but having a completely different interpretation of that experience. A lot of that comes from that internal landscape. And so, it's everything from the customs and culture and beliefs that you were raised in, what you have done yourself in figuring out who you are from that, and then how you interact with your environment that gives you instant feedback on how well those ideas and thoughts and customs and things are actually working for you. So everything from economics to religion to government to politics to everything else, we have our own interior reality that we hold as being true, or, our version of truth, and we
mm,
operate from that. And we project it onto the external world until that external world does not reflect back to us that our experience is valid. And then that can be a learning experience. It can be an existential crisis. It can be a wake-up call. It can be all kinds of things. But it really depends on the person. Does that kind of answer the question?
Well, it does answer the question. I mean, that tells me now I understand what you mean by internet in the landscape now. And what I'm wondering now is so when like you and I are interacting right now, and so
hmm
we both have different inner landscapes. So what's the significance of that difference? Like, my inner landscape versus your inner landscape. Is there some way to use it as a way of sort of bridging differences, or is it just a framework for understanding why like disagreements or agreements might occur, or like how is it significant in understanding? Because when you describe the inner landscape, you're describing what individual people have, but as
hmm
we interact with
Yeah.
other people, and since everybody has their own inner landscape, then how does that concept help you in any way?
Well, I think, part of it is how well does your inner landscape allow you to interact with people who are different than you?
Oh, okay.
If your inner landscape is like, I am right, everything that I believe is absolutely right. And there are people like that. They're kind of on one end of the extreme.
Oh, yeah.
And so they project that kind of rightness out there in the world, and everything has to either line up with that or they have to fight it until it lines up with that. So that's kind of one end of the extreme. Another end of an extreme is where people who part of their inner landscape is that they're always wrong. Whatever I
Mm.
do is wrong or bad or this. And so I'm always looking
Self-doubt.
outside myself. Yeah, um, to find something that I'm supposed to make me better, or to, find all the ways that I'm wrong.
Mhm.
And that's the other kind of end. And for most people have an inner landscape that allows them to interact with other people. And generally, the more similar that other person's view of reality or allowance of other people to have a different experience than them allows them to have positive interactions with people. But so you and I were both American.
Mm.
We're both of the same generation. We would have a lot, even though we've had different experiences, we have a lot of the same formative ideas that have helped to shape us. Now, if I was talking to somebody who was from like rural Paraguay, who might have been brought up with some an entirely different set of expectations about the world, it might take us longer to find some common ground in which to navigate a conversation about something that was deeply meaningful. So I think that it really depends on who's doing the talking and how much your inner landscape allows you to let other people have a sense of their own reality without feeling threatened by it.
Okay. Well, okay, that's actually kind of useful to know. So, in terms of vice and virtue, I guess I should ask right off the top, is that a framework that makes sense in your inner landscape? I mean, it makes sense in mine, but is it a framework that makes sense in your inner landscape?
Well, I don't really term things. This is what I wanted to ask you because I don't, to me, vice and virtue are things that, are interior to us. And like we try to place vice and virtue labels on external things. And yet that doesn't really work because some things that are supposed to be virtuous actually have a lot of bad things or viceful things involved in them. And then some things that we might consider, vices can have some really wonderful aspects to them. So I actually wanted to ask you because you had said this is your topic.
Mhm.
And you had said that you had really been thinking a lot about virtue and vice, and that your experience growing up in New Orleans informed that for you. And I really want to hear what that is for you.
Well, like you said that, okay, so your way of looking at the framework of vice and virtue is that there's what's going on inside of you. And this is almost like the finger pointing at the moon sort of thing, where
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
ascribing these two terms to, either one of these two terms to a thing, and they may not even, the actual thing may not even turn out to be accurately represented by the term you ascribe to it. So, like you said, you are what you call a vice may actually wind up having virtuous properties to it, or at least
Mhm.
playing the
Yeah.
same role that you assume virtue would play in your life, even though
Yeah.
you thought it was a vice. And so, no, that's not the way I looked at it. I mean, the way I look at it, and I don't know. I mean, I can't really analyze myself well enough to know where this exactly came from. But I think of vice and virtue more as, let's say, you're standing in a room. On one
Hmm.
side of the room is a bar, and you might have really high end liquor. You might have like marijuana or something like that. And on a TV set, you might have like the types of things like mixed martial arts or some kind of really violent sport that you can get into.
Hmm.
And then on the other side of the room, you have a balanced, a balanced meal with, just the right balance of vegetables and meat and stuff
Hmm.
that would make you healthy. If that were your normal diet, you'd be a very healthy person. You live a long time.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the way I see vice and virtue, almost like, things that it's and I view those things as occupying their own sort of world, because the bar and the marijuana, and the weed and everything else
Hmm.
tend to exist in the world together. Whereas the balanced meal tends to exist in another world, and they
Hmm.
tend to be separate.
All right. Can I throw a wrench in that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so with your virtuous balanced meal, if that is a rigid construction for you, that I can only eat a balanced meal, and that begins to dictate your life to the
Mhm.
point that you won't go to a bar where you might have, a drink because, that's a viceful place, that then becomes, it's not a vice, but it does become a significant restriction
Mhm.
and something that is not healthy for you.
Mhm.
And if you are a person who needs a little social lubrication to really have, to step into social lives, like if you've been, and this is a big thing with younger people now, is that, they're not really going and meeting each other in places.
Right.
And so if you can add a little bit of alcohol or something to help people loosen up to make social connections, there's a virtue within that, even if we would normally call, a place that has lots of alcohol and marijuana and whatever that mixed martial art, MMA on the TV. There's elements of that can be really beneficial, and elements of the first one that can be quite harmful. So to me, everything is a shade of gray, and it really depends on what it is for you personally, rather than the labels that we put on it externally, because sometimes those labels can cause a lot more problems than they can help.
Well, so I agree with you in this sense that the
Mhm.
person who can seamlessly weave from one to the other when they need to is
Hmm.
probably the most balanced person.
Probably,
Not the
yeah.
person on either side of the on either side. It's the person who can weave seamlessly through one and the other. So I totally agree with you. Plus, I also think your point about young people not like drinking as much, not going out meeting each other as much. It does strike me, and again, I'm not seeing this data directly,
Hmm.
but I'm kind of like watching videos where you have experts talking about studies they've done. And it is striking to me that there seems to be a correlation between consumption of alcohol,
Hmm.
frequency of having sex, and
Right.
the frequency with which people are actually partnering up and getting into meaningful relationships. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
there seems to be some kind of correlation between the two. And to your point, we may have kind of thought all this time was like, yeah, I used to go to bars all the time, and never mind the fact that that's where I met my spouse that I was married to for
Hmm.
like 20, 30 years.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's like maybe society would have been better off with less of that. It turns out that maybe society needs at least a certain amount of that for like people.
Or they need some other way to get the same results. Like alcohol has a lot of other issues. I mean, there's those health issues, there's, affordability issues, there's all kinds of things, all kinds
True.
of other things to do with that. But we don't like people don't meet in other places very much either. Like you don't meet a lot of people are working remotely, so they don't meet people at work. And all the places that we had met people before are not necessarily the places that we're meeting people now. And a bar is one of those places that people go to
Hmm.
and get socially lubricated and meet. I don't think it's the best solution necessarily, but we don't have that many other really great things. Dating apps are on their way out because that's been kind of a disaster for a lot of people. And
Hmm.
I know people who've gotten married from dating apps, but they were kind of the early versions of the dating apps,
Right,
not
right,
like,
right.
the swipe right, swipe left. So yeah, I think it could do, that it serves a function. Maybe we need other ways to serve that same function because alcohol and marijuana have other issues with them that aren't necessarily, beneficial in the long run or with high usage.
Yeah, no, I totally I agree with you. And actually, what you just said reminds me of a video that I saw. This was years ago, where this guy had done this study where he showed that over the course of 10 years, there'd been a dramatic decrease in a type of interaction that used to be a lot more common. And I forget exactly the term he used, but it was something like third party interactions. Or maybe that's not the term, but basically what he was talking about was it used to be the case that most people would interact with a person that they didn't know very, very well, but they saw
Hmm.
on a regular basis. So that person might be a letter carrier, a mailman, or a
Hmm.
mailwoman, or
Yeah.
somebody at the same person at the grocery store, or just your neighbor. Like,
Yeah.
in other words, you may not know your neighbor very well, like you've never been in their house, but you're used to seeing them.
Hmm.
And what he found was is that as like this whole sense of social isolation started to increase, the thing that decreased were the people reporting that they interacted with someone that they didn't know personally, but they kind of saw on a regular basis, and
Yeah.
that was going down. And his thesis was is that that type of interaction is a lot more important in society than we usually give it credit for, is what he
Yeah.
was
Or
saying.
even the willingness to talk to somebody that you don't know.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
when I was growing up, I was very shy, so I didn't talk to anybody I didn't know, and I barely talked to people that I knew. But now I'm talking to you. But I also like if I'm in a grocery store, if I'm something else, develop this habit of kind of creating these little micro tribes everywhere, almost everywhere I am. If I'm in a familiar place and I just want to run in, run out, I might do that. But in a lot of places, if I don't know somebody, I will make that little connection in there.
Hmm.
And the willingness of people to interact just on a regular basis with people that they don't know, whether you're sitting next to somebody in an airplane
Hmm.
or you're interacting with somebody at the grocery store or, whatever it happens to be, that skill seems to have dropped off.
Hmm.
The willingness and the ability to be able to just talk to somebody just out of the blue.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think I like the way you put it as a skill that has dropped off because I had the experience of traveling around the country.
Hmm.
And so I started off in Chicago, and then I drove all the way down to Louisiana. I didn't stay in New Orleans, but I stayed in just on the other side of Pontchartrain Lake. I forget the name of the city, kind of escapes me at the moment, but um, and then I went from there to Texas, then from Texas to Alabama, then from Alabama to New Mexico. And I noticed in New Mexico that once you cross the border between Texas and New Mexico, people kind of seem, it felt to me like people
Hmm.
become far less gregarious in the way that you see in the South, in the way that you see in Chicago specifically, which is,
Hmm.
you know, you're the people in your vicinity, whether they know you or not, are likely to engage with you in some way without any
Yeah.
kind of prompting or
Yeah.
any reason. They'll just do it. And that didn't seem to happen as much in like Albuquerque and Phoenix, Arizona.
Uh-huh.
But I did find that my having that personality and not knowing what it was I wasn't supposed to do. So in other words, just doing it anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being that person, people reacted very positively to it.
Yeah.
Like it's not like people generally don't want it to happen. That's the conclusion I came to. It's just that since that's the norm here, nobody does it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I almost felt like I had an advantage that I wasn't like, I wasn't conditioned in according to that norm. So I was able to just sort of talk to people, and I got a really good
Yeah.
response. So we're sort of veering off the topic though of the role of vice and virtue in
Okay.
society though. And I mean, the reason why I wanted to talk about this, I mean, I thought the inner landscape might be a good place because I'd never heard that concept before or heard that term,
Hmm. Okay.
is that it sort of feels like you have things that, I mean, I know what you were saying about like labeling it vice may not be wise, but you have things that you could easily put into the vice category and things
Hmm.
that you can easily put into the virtue category. So poly markets is an example of
Hmm.
that thing. And I mean, the thing about poly markets, it's essentially gambling, but it's
Yes.
a different kind of gambling from, because the way that the CEO of I forget the name of one of the major poly markets. It's right on the tip of my tongue. But the CEO's been out there sort of doing interviews. I guess
Okay.
he wants to distinguish his company
Uh-huh.
from the other companies. And he explained that when you're in a casino, you're gambling against the house, basically. Like that, you're
Uh-huh.
competing against the house. And so one or the other's gonna win. Either you're gonna win or they're gonna win. And the house has the advantage, obviously. And
Right. Always.
it's in their interest for you to lose. He said, but the way that his
Not all the time.
not all the time, exactly, because they want you to keep trying.
But yes, right. It just wants you to lose this much, yeah, over the course of a time. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Whereas this company, the way it works is they're getting a percentage of this interaction that you're having with other people. And so,
Hmm.
you know, I think he stated explicitly that we don't have a stake in whether or not you win or lose. That's what he said.
Hmm.
Okay. Because you
Hmm.
have these things that you're sort of hedging one way or the other on. So you're
Right.
hedging whether or not we're going to bomb Iran. You're hedging one way or the other on that. And so they don't have a stake into whether or not you lose money in that hedge. And that's the way he explained
Right.
it,
Because they're always making it.
because they're always making money. They make money either way.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
so, but the thing is they're, maybe not his company, but, the companies are actively targeting people who are likely to
Hmm.
have that inclination to keep trying, to your point about casinos,
Yeah.
despite the fact
Right.
that they're losing money. They're targeting those
Right.
types of people.
Yes.
And so, in that sense, it's almost like a pusher,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so you have that. But then, and also to your point, on the other side, on the virtue side, you have people looking for meaning in formal religious settings, right?
Hmm.
And so they're looking for, like I said, some form of meaning, some way to define their lives, some way to find a direction for their lives and stuff like that. And that could be a manipulative situation as well, depending on the
Yes.
religious setting that they find
Hmm.
themselves in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you do seem to have these different streams in society sort of competing for the for people in their 20s, young
Oh,
adults
yeah.
who haven't been
Absolutely.
formed. And that's what
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Going back to what you were thinking, your idea of the inner landscape,
Mhm.
how do you think, how does that work, or what are you thinking about in terms of what's happening in society right now?
Wow, that's a big question. So, are we talking like more like the young adults that are being pulled in different directions, or are we talking about society as a whole?
I want to focus on the young adults. I mean, because, the rest of us, we've kind of been there, done that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like
Okay.
we can't make mistakes, but it is very different. I mean, I remember how vulnerable. I mean, I'm lucky I didn't get into more trouble, to be honest. And so I remember what it's like to be in that mindset. So yeah, I'd like to talk
Mhm.
more about the youngins, the youth.
I want to touch on something you just said though, because if you were doing the things that you had done that you thought you might get into more trouble now with, surveillance and social media and all of these things, like I think that's such an amplifier because back in the day before we had all of those things, when you either escaped trouble or you got into trouble, oftentimes it was a period of time, it was kind of, you let go of it, but now things follow you forever.
Right.
So I think it's a whole, like, it's hard to separate out this idea of what I do now is my forever self. That kids I think have to grapple with now. Where back in the day, it was a whole thing, well, kids will be kids. And basically, like your teens and your 20s were the time that you were supposed to make mistakes.
Right.
You were supposed to do stupid things.
Exactly.
And you were supposed to experiment with life. You experiment with everything to figure out who you are.
Hmm.
And now, you don't have that opportunity to express anything because as soon as you express it, it is out into the world as like a permanent feature of you, even if you change your mind. So I think that's a stressor on kids in their teens and 20s that is extraordinary. And one of the things that one of the benefits of limiting social media when you're younger is to give you a little bit more time to experiment with life before it becomes part of your permanent record. So, I mean, that being said, the other thing that you and I would have experienced growing up is that we had a much smaller set of um, potential realities to choose from. So you had the three networks with their news. You
Uh,
had, your school and your teachers, and that we all went to the movies. And we had the same general sense of the movies that we went to. Our media was similar. So, what we looked to for a shared reality was much more contained than right now, where you can look anywhere and everywhere and find whatever you want. And so the menu available to you is huge. And I think that's a big stressor that people have now. It's freeing in some ways because it allows people to find people like them that if they didn't feel like they found, like, remember junior high school? Who felt like they knew anybody that was like them in junior high school? And now you can look outside yourself to all kinds of different things. And that has some benefit, but it does not. It's like, so when I came back from the Peace Corps, I will tell this story. You eat peanut butter, right? We all eat, well, maybe not so much anymore, but I grew up eating peanut butter. You
mhm,
probably grew up eating peanut butter.
mhm.
And, you kind of had the brands that you liked, and you went to the store, and there was a few brands there, and you picked the one that you liked, you went home. I went to the to Peace Corps, and basically with peanut butter there, like if it was in the little store I was in, you got it, and if it wasn't in there, you didn't get it. And if they had crunchy, that's what you got, and if you had smooth, that's what you got, and like that was the only choice. And then when I got back, I went down to the grocery store, and I was going to buy, among other things, peanut butter. And there, with the peanut butter shelf, there was like 60 different kinds of peanut butter. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot cope. Like, I had no criteria through which to, I mean, I could eliminate some of them, but there was just so many. And so they had jelly in it, and this had this, and this, and it was just too much. I walked out without any peanut butter because the menu of choices were just too high. And they've done a lot of studies that really show that too many choices is a barrier to action and a barrier to lots of things. And I think that's one of the problems that kids have now in creating an inner landscape is there's so much to choose from. There's a lot of anxiety about choosing properly because it's on your permanent record. Somebody has it on video somewhere. So it's a whole different group of things that people have to grapple with than we did when we were younger. So within that, I do think building your inner landscape still depends on what was your family life like. What were your primary influences growing up? Like, were you grew up in a religious household? How did that go for you in reality? Did you grow up in a household that valued education or not? That spoke English or another language? All of these different things. Did you have grandparents in your life? Because that's a huge connection point for kids. And not everybody now has grandparents that are close by. I had one set that were close, one set that went across the country. It's more and more likely that kids are separated from family because of the way that we've kind of dispersed. And so I still think a lot of that inner landscape is built in the very, very early years. And the more stability that you have, like the more foundation you have and stability you have there, the easier it is to kind of build on something, even if it's something that takes you a while to figure out, than it is if you have a very chaotic childhood and there's not much of a foundation to build on. And then you walk into the store and there's 60 kinds of peanut butter, and what do you choose? Because you don't have like that stable center to say, okay, so what are my values in choosing peanut butter? Do I want the natural peanut butter? Do I want the stuff with the jelly in it? Do I want sugar in it? Do I not want sugar in it? You don't have as many formative experiences to give you the tools that you need to be able to choose for yourself in a wise way to
I
explore.
hadn't really thought of it in that sense as to how, I'm running across these videos where people who are young, like, I mean, I'm talking maybe millennials and Gen Z, who are relaying these stories about how, oh, I kind of went this direction for a little while, because at that point in my life, in my early 20s, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no direction.
Mhm,
Um, and so there wasn't really any clear path for me. And so this came into my view. And so I sort of went with
mhm,
that because it was there. But I guess the other thing that they're not saying is that is highly unlikely that this person wasn't on some level aware of all the different things that are out there in the world because of the internet. Because I agree
mhm.
with you, the internet
Yeah.
sort of has not so much shrunk the world in a way, it's almost made it where you know that a lot of stuff is out there, and it's sort of like your experience of coming back to the US and encountering the new commercial
Mhm.
environment that we had fallen
Yeah.
into, where because I remember watching a video about the guy who suggested to a company that they should have all these different forms of tomato sauce. I don't remember his name and all that kind of stuff, but I distinctly
Uh-huh.
remember him like he was some sort of sociologist or economist or something like that,
Mhm.
and he did some consulting
Probably an
work
economist.
for a company that produced tomato sauce. And his
Mhm.
recommendation to them was, no, you don't want to have this, and this. What you want is to have all these different options, and you'll sell more tomato sauce because even though people aren't going to do what you did necessarily and not buy tomato sauce, what they'll see is like, oh, there's tomato sauce with like onions in it, or tomato sauce with garlic, or tomato sauce,
Uh-huh.
and they'll feel
Yeah.
like you've spoken to me. I'll take this one. And in a way, I think that going back to like a young person who's sort of coming into the world with the wide internet and all this stuff fighting
Mhm.
for your attention, there's
Yeah.
sort of it's almost overwhelming in a way. I can imagine that is sort of overwhelming
Yeah.
because, like you said, we didn't have that. As a matter
No.
of fact, as you were saying that at first, the thought occurred to me that I probably would not have been nearly as driven to travel the way I
Mhm.
was if the world seemed so unmysterious. If the world
Right.
seems
Yeah.
so like it's all right there. So if I want to know something about India, I can just log into this
Mhm.
platform and just sort of eavesdrop on a bunch of people who are probably trying to
Yeah.
get my attention anyway,
Yeah.
because of YouTube, and maybe they're trying to get subscribers to make money, or Thailand, or I mean, you can name almost anywhere in the world, and that's the case. And so would I have been as drawn to going to traveling as much and exploring if that was in my phone? I
Yeah.
don't think I actually
No,
I don't think
totally.
so. I totally don't think so. So it's an interesting kind of thought experiment to sort of or an interesting consideration as to like maybe this is part of the problem. We don't think of it necessarily as something contributing to that inaction, but it might
Right.
contribute to the inaction in the same way that all of the peanut butter
Yeah. Well, and if you add to like the peanut butter story was about, peanut butter, but if you look at all that's available now, it's all the stories attached to the peanut butter.
That's
So
true.
you're looking at, and everybody is like, well, this is what you could be if you buy my product or for my program, or, you do this track here. So it's not just about the things that we can get. It is the stories created around those things that's like, well, which direction do I want to go? Like, where does it feel good for me? And when there's so much to choose from,
Mhm.
and maybe none of it feels really good, but then how do you find your way forward when everything is about trying to follow the right influencer or follow the right path that somebody has done versus like when I was growing up, it was like, well, here's the menu of choices available to you. And within this menu of choices, you can do whatever you want. And so, you're going to go to college because that wasn't a choice that you're going to go to college. But within college, like I could choose whatever path I wanted to do within that. So it kind of narrowed those choices down. It allowed me a lot of freedom to choose within those choices. Whereas, if you're presented with 1,000 different things with 1,000 different paths and stories, you kind of lack the freedom to be able to make a contained decision that helps move you forward. You kind of disperse out, like your energy goes out all over the place versus consolidating and moving in a direction. And maybe we move directions. I remember I did that a lot. Like I shifted from here and I shifted from here and I shifted from here, but I didn't have 8,000 things to choose from as I was doing that. It's like, the choices came to here, then within there were these choices and it came down to here. And then I went over here and the choices got bigger again. But it was a path forward that I think for me, I needed that path forward. Like I would have been very stifled if I'd have stayed in the US and stayed home a lot. But I think if I was that age again and trying to navigate the world, like you said, the world was a mystery and I wanted to explore that. And if there wasn't a mystery, I don't know if I would have explored it. And I would have felt like I needed to, I don't know, I'm not even sure what I would have felt like I would have needed to do. I'm trying to think of like if I, because I went to college and went to Japan to teach English and I traveled after that. But if I'd had the world in my phone, at the time. I mean, the other thing about it is you never get to disconnect from where you are.
Well, see, that's
So,
exactly what I was just thinking. Is I know what I would have
yeah.
done. I would have
What would
basically,
you have done?
I would have. I mean, because what this landscape does would have done for me is I would have used my world, which I was constantly trying to make my day to day interesting. I
Mhm.
mean, I was crazy to put it mildly.
Uh-huh.
And so I would have basically felt like, well, the world should see my crazy. So I definitely would have
Mhm.
had like a camera. I would have had my own channel. I would have done all kinds. I would have spent like all day just basically filming my world.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I would have done. And I mean, the bad thing about that is it's unlikely I would have ever left New Orleans, to tell you the truth,
Okay.
because my whole existence and the whole way that
Mhm.
I'm like, succeeding in life, probably I could see it
Mhm.
working out, is I'm succeeding in life by being here and being me
Mhm.
at this
Yeah.
at this point. Like the same immature, crazy, joking me, I'm being that all the time, and I'm being rewarded for being that. I mean, because that's the thing about like whenever I see people who have these channels and they're doing crazy stuff, it's like I almost feel like the been there, done that kind of thing is like, yeah, I can see why he or she is doing that.
Mhm.
And in a way, I do sort of feel like there is that thing of they're being rewarded to stay in that place, to be that person. And
Yeah.
so it's very unlikely that they're going to go out and explore the world and
Well, that's
to look
true.
outside
Yeah.
of themselves.
And then there's another component right now. Like I know a number of kids in their 20s.
Hmm.
Some have jobs, some don't have jobs, but the whole like career trajectories that usually college and then you move into, well, I didn't, but you move into like your first job and you kind of move forward in that kind of sphere is kind of has been crumbling,
Oh yeah,
because of AI and other things.
yeah.
And so that sense of self and then that inner landscape where they were taught, I'm going to do this and I'm either going to graduate high school or not graduate high school or whatever and move into the job market, or I'm going to go to college and I'm going to move into the job market and have a particular kind of life. And that's kind of my sense of self, are finding that that actually is not as available. And so you kind of see these kids, and a lot of kids are very thoughtful. They're not, they're a little bit lost, because it's like, well, all that I saw myself doing is unavailable to me at this point. And so what is there for me to do in the world?
Hmm.
And not being able to be themselves in the world, because the direction that they had gone, that was supposed to be, the dream direction that we're all taught to do,
Hmm.
has kind of closed.
Right.
And so there's kind of this inner reckoning, then this existential angst and crisis among younger people, that's like, well, the world that I was trained to move into is no longer exists, and or is crumbling. And then how do I actually make my way in the world? So it always has felt like it's crumbling, but I think right now that's really a stronger case for them, and that the inner landscape of like, oh my gosh, like this is what I was told life would be like, and there's a little bit of freedom in there of like, oh, okay, I guess I don't follow that story, and a lot of terror of like, well, then what is there for me?
It's interesting what you just said, because I was trying to think of the difference between now and the past, because again, obviously I watch a lot of videos where people of different ages talk about different things. And I recently saw a video, a conversation between David Frum and Fareed Zakaria. And,
Mm-hmm.
the first 10, 20 minutes with them sort of reminiscing about when they met, and in an Ivy League environment, and all this kind of stuff. And they were talking about, yeah, in the 70s, there were all these problems. The impression I got from the way they were talking is that from their
Uh-huh.
perspective, things are not necessarily as distinctively dire as they may seem to people who were not adults in the 70s, because the 70s had its own set of problems. But at the same
Uh-huh.
time, I would challenge them. Of course, I don't know them, but I would challenge them as to whether or not did things feel like they were crumbling. Because what you
Mm-hmm.
just said is definitely true. I believe it's definitely true that there is a feeling that a bunch of different, like a whole era is coming to an end. It definitely feels that way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, the 70s had its problems, but the global world order wasn't changing. I mean,
No. No.
America wasn't on the verge of leaving NATO. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Oh no.
global supply chains weren't like being disrupted. I think that that is a meaningful difference. And like you're saying, I just kind of owned up to the fact that I was more on the crazy side early on in life. And then I just sort of kept pursuing things and exploring things and, finding my way and stuff. Whereas I did eventually wind up in a long, stable situation where I met a bunch of people who in their high school and college years were the opposite of me. Those were the kids who were just like,
Okay.
I want to get good grades so I can get into a good
Mm-hmm.
college. And then I get into a good college so I can get a good job after that.
Mm-hmm.
And they all did, actually. They all did.
Yeah.
And it was very clear to me. It's like, oh, so you're that kid who actually kept studying until you got A's. And you're that kid who actually got accepted into the school that's
Mm-hmm.
number 7, as opposed to the school, it's the ranking that I got into and whatnot. And that's the reason why you have this stable job in the suburb that I happen
Mm-hmm.
to be living in right now.
Uh-huh.
And that's not the case anymore. That is not the case anymore. I
No.
mean, kids are coming out, those very same kinds of kids are coming out and not being rewarded for all the
Yeah.
stuff that, maybe you can characterize it as they gave up in high school and college. I don't know.
Think so, but I mean, but bringing it back to vice and virtue, it was supposed to be a virtue to go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a job. I mean, those were all things that were considered culturally
That's
virtuous,
true.
right?
That's true.
And they have, but now the way that people who are unable to make that in that sphere now are having to turn to things that we considered vices, like poly markets and Robinhood, and some of these other places where you're online gambling, where you're trying to make your rent through these things that we call vices, because the virtuous route just isn't really working.
Well, yeah, I do believe that that's there too. Although I guess in a way, like I've never been attracted to gambling. So I don't think I've ever would have,
Mhm.
yeah, I never would have chosen like, and I guess that it's a fascinating thing as I say this, I'm thinking of how I just said that I was attracted to discovering new things and exploring,
Mhm.
which is risk oriented. I mean, there's risk associated with that, but the actual gamification of it where you're literally trying to, what are the rules and, here I'm gonna the stakes are money and I'm trying to
Mhm.
basically make more money. I'm putting some money in because I want to win more money. That's never been a system that's been very appealing to me. Although I can understand that, if you're a person who doesn't feel like you have any other opportunities,
Mhm.
that might be attractive. Or or the other way to look at it is these companies are targeting people because they can do it through micro targeting over the internet.
Yeah.
They can
Yeah.
find you, like they can sort of
Yeah.
put these little crumbs out there. Since I'm not attracted to gambling, I'm not gonna pursue the crumbs. But someone who it does
Mhm.
have that inclination, the things that they're doing on the internet, they're attracting these people to them that they can take their money. You know.
Well, one of the paths that they've been doing that, the virtue of investing, right? That's one of the things we're supposed to do. So Robinhood captured a lot of people who were wanting to invest because investment is what you're supposed to do. And,
Right.
you can make micro investments and stuff in there.
Mhm.
They gamified investing so that you could, continue to do it.
Right.
It was the rise in options, which has caused all kinds of other issues in the stock market and part of the acceleration or the amplification of the stock market. But people were not getting rewarded on Robinhood because in the same way, because it was not instant I mean, with options, it's a little bit of instant gratification, which is why I think that the gamification of options is one, dangerous, and two, something that really caught on Robinhood. But if you had the people who are attracted to the risk and to the immediate feedback,
Mhm.
a lot of that targeting targeted Robinhood and some of those other online investing app people and sucked them into sports betting and then
I see
now
what you're
sucking them
saying.
into the poly market. So
Yeah,
it's the
yeah, yeah.
gamification
Right.
of a virtue
Mhm.
that then move people into, I mean, it's not necessarily a vice, but if you're losing your rent money,
Right.
that's a problem,
Mm.
or if that's your only form of income because you can't find a decent income elsewhere,
Mhm.
or you can't find enough of an income with a job that you can get close by, so you have to supplement it with gambling. Like that's a societal problem. That's not just an individual problem. We try to put it on the individual, but it is actually a collective problem.
No, I agree. I agree. But it's an interesting like attraction to one type of risk, whereas there's also an aversion to another kind of risk, because the kind of risk that we put ourselves into is meeting new people, going new places, trying new things,
Yeah.
that kind
Social
of
risk.
risk. Yeah, social risk,
Yeah.
exactly. Whereas, in a way, going back to how it's the internet, this is all happening on your phone or your laptop or your tablet or whatever. And
Yeah.
so you're not meeting new people, you're not spending that time taking social risk. You're
Yeah.
spending the time just kind of in this game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I don't know. To me, it's kind of crazy, but at the same time, I can't understand, especially like what you were saying about the difference between like they're targeting people who are really just looking to invest money in like the traditional sense of the word, but the distance between the real economy and the financial markets has become so great that
Huge.
like the distance between the financial markets and like sports betting doesn't seem all that great anymore.
No, they're pretty close together, but yeah, the whole financialization of everything
Yeah.
is like so removed from everyday reality. And even the stock market is so removed from everyday reality.
Oh yeah, my God,
I mean,
yes.
it tanked for a little while there at the beginning of the Iran war, and now it's like just speeding right along. Like the S&P had one of the best days ever. And, I listen to people who are like talk about some of the dynamics that are hidden within there. So it's still kind of a house of cards, it sounds like. But it's as long as the stock market's going up, people are like, oh yeah, everything's fine.
Mhm,
The world is going to
mhm,
hell, but as long as we can make money off of it, it's fine.
mhm.
And I don't get me started. Okay. Anyway, yes, we have these illusions, and that's actually part of the inner landscape. A lot of us were raised, and we're still being told that is that the economy is good if the stock market is good. If the stock market starts sliding, then people are like, oh my gosh, is there something bad happening? Even if they're not in the stock market. I mean, they don't even
Right.
care, but it's an indicator that's been like inculcated into us that when that is going well, the economy is going well, even if you can't find a job, if you can't afford a house, you don't have
Hmm.
food, all that kind of stuff, then the economy is doing fine because the stock market is doing fine. It's part of that inner landscape that is often at division with our lived reality.
Hmm.
But, boy, it's deep down in there.
And actually, that goes back to something you said very early in this conversation, which is it is striking to me how many people sort of feel like the inability to get a job is their fault,
Yeah.
which, I mean, I remember like that's the other thing about traveling the country, I think that is eye opening is, there really is a difference between an economy that's producing jobs and an economy that's not
Hmm.
producing jobs, or an
Right.
economy where the number of jobs are kind of, sort of flat,
Hmm.
and so like it seems as though the same type of person is sort of entering the job market that is leaving the job market. And
Hmm.
so it's not
Yeah.
really dynamic for new entrants, like that's the
Yeah.
barrier is
Yeah.
you don't have the profile of the people who get work here, Whereas when you
Hmm.
go into an economy where businesses are just, opening up a lot and they're just desperate to
Yeah.
find people, it is a lot easier to find a job in those places.
It is.
But it's amazing how many people think of it. I mean, and the people I've talked to who have this attitude have jobs. And so they're like
Yes.
judging
Yeah.
other people. It's like if
Hmm.
you can't get a job, it's your fault. It's like, yeah, you haven't been out of work in a while
Yeah.
in a tough job market. So yeah, I mean, and that kind of goes to what you're saying about like the difference between a person who blames themselves or is like doubts
Hmm.
themselves versus
Yes.
people who like need the world to sort of cater to their way of thinking, that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess what we've sort of done fairly consistently throughout this conversation is just exploded the idea that the framework of vice and virtue is useful. We've just sort of
Yeah.
destroyed that
Yeah,
notion
to me, it's not because like
completely.
you were just talking about like that whole inner landscape of judging other people because you've got a job, so obviously it must be easy to get a job and maintain a job. So I can judge you for not having a job
Right, right,
because part
right.
of the inner landscape that we're taught, and if you've never had a lived experience in which you're like, holy crow, if I don't get a job this week, I'm going to lose my apartment. And you
Mhm.
can't get a job, or you can't, like, now I know people that they put in 200 resumes online every week and get no callbacks,
Yeah.
and it's not because they don't match the criteria of the job. It's because the way that that market is and the way that it's working now does not give people without that aren't being headhunted actively by people in there that want mid-career people. It
Hmm.
doesn't give them a shot. It doesn't give them a way to get in
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you don't even get a personal interview. It's not even about you. It's just about, who's crunching that number. So there is a lot of disconnect between our inner landscape that we've been taught and the world as it's operating now. And there always has been, but I think that schism is getting larger because depending on when you were raised in your life experience, if you've never experienced what life is like now for kids in their 20s, it's not really a reality.
Hmm.
It's their fault that you're not, well, you should get a better education. Well, I got my master's degree. What else do you want me to get?
Right, exactly.
And all these different things. Well, you should stop living with your parents and go get an apartment. Well, I don't have $2,500 a month to spend on an apartment.
Hmm.
And, I need to live here until I can do that. Um, it is part of that inner landscape that's kind of in a schism, more so I think than it has been. It's always been a generational thing, but I think even now it's even more of that. And I think it behooves us all to really like question our own inner landscape. And
Yeah,
I think travel does that. Because then you're like, oh yeah, well, all the stuff that I thought was real life and ordinary reality has no applicability in this place.
yeah,
So
that
I have to open up my sense of what reality is.
oh yeah, travel is I mean, there's so many benefits, but yeah, but the inner landscape really is a useful way to think about all of the benefits of travel because
Yes.
that you can't help but notice, especially if you travel to places that are very, very different from where you're used to. I mean, that's the great thing about, being immersed in a new language. You learn. you learn amazingly fast, like the basics when you're in that situation because
Yeah.
you have to. But I mean, when I was in Brazil, like, one thing that struck me about how like language is connected so much to like the entire way that we engage with the
Mhm.
world. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you get used to people kind of going to what you were saying about you and I, even though we grew up on opposite sides of this really big country, we are Americans. And so we do have a
Mhm.
shared sort of, experience in some sense. And, I just realized, and I was only in Brazil for like 6 weeks, but
Mhm.
you just sort of are used to certain things being affirmed. You're not used to
Mhm.
having to explain so much, and having to figure so many things out. It's just like
Yeah.
it's really, I think it's a good way to be challenged when you're younger, especially. But I think it's good at any point in your life. It's just
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
you tend to get kind of stubborn as you get older.
Yeah, and kind of your landscape gets a little tighter. But to like speak to your point about language, I was reading a article one time and they were talking about how, we don't have this in English, but other countries or other languages like Spanish and German and things have the feminine and the masculine, and then
Mm,
German also has the neuter, and that they're not even, they're not the same feminine or masculine depending on the culture, and that they were asking people in places that had no gender assignment like English, and then Spanish and French and German and things, to ascribe qualities to objects like a chair or a pen or a road or something, and that the people who had, like a masculine attribution to that described it in masculine terms, even though it was a pen. And languages where they had a feminine attribution for something that was neutral, basically, a pair of glasses or whatever, would attribute to a feminine qualities to it.
mhm,
And so that's a way that language really shapes how we view the world in ways that we don't really think about that much. And that's
mhm.
another inner landscape piece that if you have, particularly if you just have one language, like that whole language dictates
Right.
the way that you view things.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. I totally agree. So I guess the last thing, because we've got what, like a minute left. The last thing is, have you thought it at all about how either the idea of the inner landscape, or have you thought about some of the issues that I mentioned in terms of young people sort of just trying to navigate society? What are some of the things that have come to mind for you that might be useful, that are also realistic? Because you can always say, well, yeah, if you travel, but a person may not have the means, because you
Right,
because you
right.
had the Peace Corps, and I was in Brazil
Hmm.
for a class and stuff like that. So people may not actually have the means to travel. So what are
Right.
some of your, have you thought about anything? Or I mean, if not, then I totally understand because I don't have anything.
All right. Well, so this is what I would say if you want to work with your inner landscape is oftentimes, if what we think or believe about ourselves or the world is challenged, we tend to feel threatened, anxious. We want to react, and wait, like it just feels like an attack. And that I see that a lot in younger people in particular. And that's part of it's just the age group because you don't have as much life experience. And part of it is, I think, because we've kind of decamped into our little tribes and we all
Right,
have this self-righteousness going on.
right.
But if you can dismantle that reaction so that you're open to a different way of thinking and feeling and stuff, and then actively pursue things that are unfamiliar to you.
Hmm.
So, and people that you might not have talked to or grown up with, and you can do it online. Like I've got friends all over the world that I've met through the internet that I talk to that
Hmm.
I've never met in person,
Hmm.
or experiences that you've not had, and to let that improve, or not improve, but expand your world rather than having to narrow your world because that feels like a threat. And I think about some of these universities with safe zones and things like that, and I think there's some benefit to that if you're actually in a situation where you are being personally attacked. But to be in a, to have to put yourself in a situation where you're not personally challenged is a detriment to you that will follow you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. So
So
yeah,
just
and
my 2 cents.
well, I'm not. I guess your point about, I mean, the opportunity to travel may not be available to you, but
Mhm.
you can. The one thing you do have through the internet, is you do have access to an entire world of people, and and it's not as hard as some people may think to reach out to people and just sort of engage with them on some level. That's what I found.
Yeah. And I'd
Especially,
also tell people like to talk to people at the grocery store line. Like,
well, that's true too.
be
Yeah.
take social risk, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and because
yeah.
that'll break down a lot of that fear and anxiety is if you just talk to people. The social risk of talking to somebody, and you don't have to talk about like politics. I mean,
Hmm.
please don't.
Hmm.
But you can
Hmm.
talk about like, you know, do you know how to tell a ripe lemon because or melon or whatever? Because you know, just ask a question. Um,
Well, actually, the last thing I will say that I'd almost forgotten until you mentioned the travel part is one thing I noticed from city to city in the United States is that
mhm.
I would explore the cities much more thoroughly than the people who grew up there,
Oh yeah,
and that was
yeah,
strange to me because that wasn't true of me in New Orleans. I know New Orleans really well. I mean, I've been all over New Orleans and partied in basically every part of the city, you
yeah.
know.
But I think New Orleans is it's a pretty unique, singular place.
Well, you'd be surprised though. I mean, there are these invisible barriers. And again, I've never been, I guess I'm just sort of mischievous in that way. I don't respond to the you're not supposed to message very well. I tend to
Hmm.
respond to that message just like, well, why the fuck not? That tends to be my
Uh-huh.
reaction to that message. And so, but there are a bunch of invisible barriers that are kind of class, skin tone, you know,
Okay.
oriented. So, I mean, and in that sense, it sort of reminds me of more so of Chicago than New York, because New York is such a big city, I mean, it's like it's understandable why a person would not necessarily know the whole city of New York because it's so large.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like every city I've been to, I've gotten to know the city. It felt to me like at least parts of the city that people who were native there didn't know at all. And you can do that if you're there. I mean, you can totally just get to know those places. So okay, so yeah, we're just over an hour and 2 minutes. This has been a great conversation as usual.
Yep. Yep. Very good.
We're gonna do it again in 2 weeks on Friday at
Hmm.
3 o'clock. So thanks for joining us.
All right. See you next time.
Yep. So